for sponsoring us. Workfront's awesome. They have been sponsoring us for, I don't know, a year and a half since this thing started. Food every month, different things every month. So big shout out to them. We appreciate them a lot. Also, shout out to Adobe. We appreciate this awesome meeting space. So give it up for Adobe. Thank you. So both of those companies are hiring. Adobe is hiring Angular developers specifically, but they're always hiring. And Workfront also has jobs open. Go take a look at their boards, and we appreciate them keeping us up. All right, so tonight we have these two presentations. We've got the illustrious Joe Eames presenting on becoming Betazoid. And then we have Jordan Last presenting on a simple pattern for client-side storage. You can read it better than I can, probably, right? I'm looking this way. I've got the wrong thing in front of me. Anyway. After that, we've got a raffle every month. Front End Masters sponsors a raffle, so we're going to give away 2 year-long subscriptions to Front End Masters. And we're also going to do a short networking activity. Now, don't be scared off, all right? This is going to be really short, brief, but just as something to help people meet other people. So if you're looking to find someone to help you with a project, or if you're stuck on a particular project, hopefully this will help you just meet instead of having to go around and talk to everybody before it's over. So that's it. So we're going to turn the time to Joe. Joe is, I should give a little intro to Joe, maybe. Maybe you can give a better one. Joe is on a couple of podcasts that, what is it? It's not JavaScript Jabber and Angular Adventures in Angular. And he's one of the Google developer experts and has done a lot with Angular for a long time. He also does video training for Pluralsight. He can talk more about that. But we appreciate having him here. So give it for Joe.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate that. I'm excited to be here. So the real reason I came to present today was because next week I'm going to be presenting at Angular Connect, which is in London, the big official Angular presentation out in the Europe side. Of course, here in the US, our big presentation, sorry about that, and here in the US, our big Angular conference is ngConf. Has anybody heard of ngConf? I happen to know of ngConf myself. And so ngConf's happening in May. Tickets are officially sold out, although if you have not gotten a ticket, you still want one, there will possibly be some additional tickets getting put on sale kind of last minute. So, but back to the presentation. I'm going to be presenting out at Angular Connect, and I kind of wanted to, it's always good to get a dry run through, and rather than just doing it to my dog, I thought I'd do it to you guys. So you guys are like my dog today. Thank you, appreciate that. So if I could ask all of you for a huge favor. I really care about this presentation, and I want to do a really good job. And when I give it out at Angular Connect, I want to do the best job that I can. So if you have any feedback at all, please write it down and email me. And just to make this easy on you, I'm going to write in here. That's my email address. So I'm going to leave that up in the other, well, that won't show up. But anyway, I'm going to leave that up just for a second here. Please send me an email if you have any feedback. If there's anything about the presentation you think I could improve, I would greatly appreciate your feedback. So with that, I'm going to go into my presentation, which is Becoming Betazoid, or How to Listen and Empathize with Others in the Workplace. So I want to talk specifically about empathy. And there's a reason I want to talk about empathy in the workplace. And for you guys to understand this, I want to tell you a story. Last weekend, I was down in Florida for work. I was looking at venues for another conference. Okay, so we're going around and we're visiting venues. We spent 2 days visiting different venues to have a conference at. And the second night, one of the 4 guys that's one of the 4 organizers, he was having some difficulties with his job. Things weren't going well. He really needed to work and get some stuff done, but we were busy all day long. So when we got back in around 9 p.m., we were at a new hotel. He ended up staying up all night long working, okay? And I found out in the morning that some stuff had happened, both work-related and non-work-related, while he was working all night long. He'd gotten hassled by a security guard. His room had some problems. And then, of course, he had this work issues that were going on. I think his wife was giving him some stress about leaving last minute. He was stressed about leaving last minute and taking this time off of work to go and look at venues. So the next morning, we were heading out to the airport, and some of us were getting dropped off early, some of us were getting dropped off later. And on the way out to the airport, they were discussing what had happened last night with him. He was kind of telling the story, and we were talking about the different venues, and he really had a chip on his shoulder about this venue, this last venue, because of the bad experiences that he'd had with the security and some other things. And as we were discussing, I was trying to communicate to him, well, let's not just dismiss it out of hand. There's a lot of value, a lot of positives to this. And he was in a really bad place. And I'd known this beforehand. I even thought about it before I went and got in the car. It's like, I know that he's been up all night. He had a really bad night. We shouldn't be talking about work right now. He's just not in a place where he could talk about work. But the conversation was about work, and so I started chipping in. What I tried to do was get him to understand my point of view. And it ended up, he got really upset, and this guy is actually a super, super close friend of mine, but he got really mad at me. And what was funny was the day before I was asking him for help on my talk. And I got out of the car and said goodbye and went in the airport, and I kept thinking, here I am working on this talk about empathy, and yet I had a huge lack of empathy for him and what was going on well with his life. So you might think that empathy is something you only need to have when it's your spouse and they're having a bad day, or maybe one of your kids who's having a bad day, or some very personal relationship. But that's not at all true. Empathy is extremely important, even in the workplace, and I want to talk about that. So, why do we need empathy? Again, there's my story. What went on between me and him? We're going to delve into this a little bit as we go through this presentation. Let's talk about the great lie. I call this the great lie of TV and movies. In every TV show or movie that you watch where two people get at odds and get in some argument about something, the argument always gets resolved by one of the people finally making this super well scripted statement and that cuts through to the other person's heart. And you see the other person just shocked. And they stop for a minute and they look and they realize, oh, there's something I didn't understand. And now I see the truth. And now I can truly get where this person is coming from. And it's always because the person said something that cut through the other person right to their heart and made them understand. Unfortunately, this is the great lie of TV and movies, because that does not happen. In the real world, when we are in an argument, it is two people trying to talk and 0 people listening. And no person will ever, in an argument, say the thing that finally causes the other person to, I get it now. That's not what happens. In real life, because we don't exercise empathy, we argue at each other. If you've ever gotten a shouting match with somebody, that's exactly what that is. But even a non-shouting match, two people trying to get the other person to hear and neither one listening. So, this is what I call the great lie of TV and movies. So there are things about empathy that are very important in the workplace, and I want to talk about those. First off, empathy has a lot of organizational benefits, meaning benefits to your company. Okay? First off is improved coordination. When you have a whole bunch of individuals working on a project, they need to coordinate, right? They've got to be able to communicate the different pieces of what they're working on. If you have that going on, which is what happens at any company greater than size 1, or any company who has vendors or customers, then you must be able to communicate with other people. Empathy allows you to communicate more effectively because you are able to hear better and speak better. And by speak better, I mean communicate better with the other person, allow them to hear you. Empathy gives you that. Without empathy, communication is reduced. It's less effective. So it makes a huge benefit when you're trying to coordinate various pieces of a project or various pieces of an organization. 2, improve productivity. As people communicate with each other, they form relationships, right? We don't go to work and not have a relationship with somebody. No matter how hard we try, no matter how much we may hate a person that we work with, we will have a relationship with them. It may be positive, it may be negative, but we will have a relationship with them. Through empathy, we have improved relationships where we are able to understand the other person better, what they're saying. As we have these improved relationships and more positive relationships, work is more positive. And what happens when work is more positive for people? They are more productive. When leaders and bosses listen to people, they make them feel important and valued. And that opens them up to do the work that they want to do. You guys ever had a bad day when you've gone to the office and something bad happened, your boss was down on your case? Whether it was fair or unfair, how did you feel? Very negative, very down. What was your productivity like that day? Probably pretty poor, right? Empathy will allow us to make the productivity of our employees and coworkers improved. Improve morale. As I was saying before, as we have better relationships, as we are able to get along better with the people that we work with, then they are happier, right? If people are happier at work, then their morale is up. When morale goes up, productivity goes up. And that leads to, of course, improved retention. Who likes hiring? Nobody likes hiring, right? Whether it's your boss or who has to do the hiring or just the lowliest employee who has to train somebody new, interview 10 times, right? Hiring sucks. And then we hire somebody and maybe they suck and we have to fire them and hire on somebody new, right? It's a real pain in the butt and it costs a lot of money. So from an organizational standpoint, this is a huge deal, is to be able to keep high retention. There are some personal benefits to empathy. First off, we as humans are hardwired to connect. That is innate and it is DNA. We are primates. We are hardwired to connect with other people, okay? No matter how introverted a person is, they still are hardwired to connect with other people. They may not want to go out to big parties and laugh and be in a big group of people. They may like to be in their basement most of the time, but we are all hardwired to connect. And when we do not have connections in our life, then we engage in negative behaviors. Second is self-improvement. With empathy, you can listen to what other people are saying. And when other people are saying things that you don't want to hear, but are true, empathy allows you to hear them. So that lets us take responsibility for our actions. Who here knows somebody who is always looking for somebody else to blame for their problems, right? I know every hand would go up if you really thought about it, right? We all know somebody that wants to blame somebody else. Maybe it's ourselves. It's easy to blame somebody else because it lets us put responsibility on somebody else instead of ourselves. But that steals from ourselves the opportunity to improve. When somebody comes in and says, you really screwed up, if you really screwed up, then it gives you an opportunity to improve. And it's hard to hear that without empathy. We'll talk about this more. All right, so I want to talk specifically about empathy and effective listening and what they are. First off, we've lived our lives, we got people in the room and anywhere from 20 to more than 20. And we've done a lot of listening in our lives. You've probably had a lot of work conversations. You might think you're a good listener. But the truth of it is, in general, as humans, we are terrible, terrible listeners. Okay? There are a lot of reasons for that. So, for example, have you ever found yourself in a meeting and another person's making a point about something, and what you're listening for is for them to take a breath so that you can jump in and talk? Who's done that before? I've done that all the time, right? What we're listening for is, I've got something I want to say. When is he going to pause so that I can say it, right? When is my boss finally going to take a breath about whatever? Or when is my coworker going to take finally finish what they're saying about their idea so I can say what the really good idea is? We do that all the time. We are always listening for just the opportunity for us to jump in. The other thing that we do a lot, and I find myself doing this a lot, is when somebody else is explaining their idea or their approach to solve a problem, what we listen for, and again, think of back to the conversations that you've had, is we're listening for the faults and the weaknesses. Somebody comes up with an idea, and there's one big glaring fault, right? What do? You talk about that fault. But what about this? You didn't think about that, right? Their idea may have 5 great points, and you glossed over all 5 to jump on the one weakness in their idea, right? We're not listening anymore. What we're listening for is weaknesses. We're looking for holes. We're probing, right? We are the Klingons trying to get into past the Enterprise's shields. That's what we do as we listen. We don't listen all the time because somebody's idea is not our idea. And if it's not our idea, it can't be a good idea. We do this all the time as humans. We always think that our ideas are awesome and everybody else's ideas suck. And so we tend not to listen to other people's ideas for that same reason. Another reason that we tend not to listen very well is because our identity is tied up in the work that we do. Right? I'm sure you guys have all experienced this. You do some work and somebody has some criticism about the work. How does that feel? Like they're attacking you personally, right? And when somebody's attacking you personally, are you listening? Or are your shields up? Are your defenses up? We get defensive and we don't listen. We always do this idea of my work is who I am, and if somebody attacks my work, they're attacking me. Now, maybe they could say their point in a nicer way, right? But inherently, we feel like if I spawned this idea, if I wrote this piece of code and somebody comes in and criticizes it, they're criticizing me. I remember I worked at a place where we had this one class that was 2,200 lines long, and I was constantly using it as the example of the way that we shouldn't be coding. I was brand new. And this guy who'd been there for like 6 years finally one day blew up at me because he'd written it, and I had no idea that he'd written it. Here I was constantly criticizing his work, right? He was really attached to that piece of code. And thankfully, I've been through that experience. I've written code that's older than a day, and people have criticized. So, we are bad listeners. What is good listening? Who's heard the term reflective listening? A few people? Okay. Reflective listening is what good listening is. In reflective listening, you set aside everything that you want to say, and you put it on hold. Now, maybe you have a lot of really great ideas, so maybe you need to keep a pad of paper and a pencil handy so that you can jot down a quick note to remind yourself what that good idea is so you don't forget it when it's time for you to present your ideas or to bounce ideas back off somebody else. But you put aside everything that's going through your head of what you want to do and what you want to say, and instead simply listen to the other person. Then, when they are done speaking, you reflect back to them what you heard and how you understood it. And you say it in different words. You don't parrot the exact same thing that they said, but you say what they've said in different words and say, so what you mean is this. And then that gives them the opportunity to correct or incorrect you. I cannot tell you how many times I've almost slept on the couch because I thought I knew what my wife was saying, right? It is so easy to misunderstand somebody else's words when they're talking about an idea and an approach. Oh, this is the way that we should solve this, we should do this. And it's easy to misinterpret their words because as they're saying it, it makes sense in their heads. And as we hear it, it doesn't quite make sense to us. So always reflect back to the other person what you've heard. That is reflective listening. That is good listening. So we always want to practice good listening, which we call reflective listening. So empathy itself. I want to talk about empathy. Empathy isn't just the ability to think about what emotions are going through somebody else's head, right? Or their heart. We think of empathy, if you think of the word empathy, you probably think of something like, I'm feeling your feelings. And I'm going back to that whole Betazoid thing, right? Who watched The Next Generation? Not enough people. Seriously disappointed. Best Star Trek series ever to be on TV. All right. Deanna Troi was a Betazoid, I can't remember, and she could sense other people's emotions. That was her job. She was a ship's counselor. Empathy is understanding feelings, and it's important to realize that empathy is feelings because we are tied up in our feelings. We are feeling creatures. When somebody expresses a thought, especially once they start getting into a stressful situation, underneath it is feelings, and you need to understand the feelings that somebody else is having. So, for example, back to my original story. I'm in their car with my friend. What is he feeling? He's tired. He's frustrated. He's angry at how he was treated. He's frustrated that I'm not listening, right? Those are all the feelings that are going through his head. I need to understand those feelings. So empathy is not just understanding somebody's feelings, but it's also the ability to reflect back to that person what their feelings are and communicate back with them as to what they're going through and how they're feeling, right? And that comes down to simply ideas, and it does come to feelings as well. So it can be listening to an idea and reflecting that back, but it also is, and I'm sure you guys, anybody who's been in a work meeting that's gotten a little tense, you've seen that somebody gets a little afraid about something. And they start saying, no, we really can't do that. And that's a time when you can identify the feelings that they're feeling, right? You're frustrated. It sounds like you're really afraid that the client might pull out, right? Oh, it sounds like you're really angry that our boss told us we have to do this without being able to choose what framework we're using, right? It's important to identify their feelings. Empathy is a way to say to somebody that I'm there with you in what you're feeling. I'm there and with you in what you're doing, what you're saying. So if it's simply an idea, then I'm there with you, I understand the idea, and I truly get what you're trying to say. If it's in a frustrating situation, it's being able to say, I totally get where you're coming from. I've been angry at my boss before. I've been afraid of something bad happening because of a choice that I've made. I totally get where you're coming from. There's a reason that we have to get to that place where we're identifying with the other person what they're going through. And the reason for that is that people have an easier time getting over and getting past their feelings and getting through the feelings to a productive place when they're able to identify it themselves and when they feel like they're not being attacked and that somebody else understands where they're at. And this is true of work relationships, spouse relationships and romantic relationships, parent and child relationships. We all get negative feelings, and we are able to get past those negative feelings when we can identify them. And it really helps to have somebody else help identify our feelings. When you say, hey, it sounds like you're really afraid that the customer might pull out, and they, in their head, aren't thinking, I'm afraid the customer's going to pull out. What they're trying to do is tell you, hey, if we do this, that customer might go. And you identify that. All of a sudden, that lets them move past that and say, you're right, I'm really afraid of that. And then you can move on to a proper solution. So we need to understand that empathy is a way to get with that person in where they're feeling. There are a lot of things that we think empathy is that empathy is not. And so I want to go through this list of what empathy is not. First off, empathy is not distraction. All right? So you're in a work situation, you go into a meeting, somebody's really had a bad day. They're really frustrated about something, right? The one thing that we don't want to do is try to distract them from their feelings, from where they're at. That's not going to be effective. So, oh, well, let's start talking about this architectural solution when meanwhile, they're really pissed off at their boss because their boss just denied them the 2 weeks vacation they need to go out on their anniversary trip, right? If they're pissed off about that, trying to distract them with an architectural discussion is not going to be effective. So it's not distraction. Empathy is not blaming, oh my gosh, your boss, he's such an a-hole, right? Our boss sucks. That is not empathy either, right? That's commiseration. That is not going to help that person move past those feelings. Empathy is not sympathy. Sympathy is, I think, coined up very well in the Southern phrase, bless your heart. Bless your heart, right? You ever heard that? It's like being talked down to like you're 6 again. Bless your heart. Oh, you just found out that your dog died this morning. Bless your heart. That's sympathy. That's saying, oh, you poor dear. It's so hard where you're at way over there, right? That is not empathy. Empathy is not saying, boy, it really sucks where you're at. That's sympathy. Empathy is not being more hurt than the other person. Oh my gosh, you denied your vacation? I can't believe it. I'm mad. Throw the desk, right? That's not empathy. Okay? Empathy is not rescuing. He denied your vacation. I'm going to go right in there and talk to him and fix this problem for you. This especially applies to anybody in here who is a man. Okay? We like to fix things. It's a very genetic thing for us. We like to fix things. Do not fix things. This particular piece of advice applies to you men specifically in your romantic relationships, but certainly in your friendship relationships. When somebody is going through some tough emotions, they don't want to have it fixed. They want to be empathized with. They want to be heard and understood. Don't try to fix the solution. Don't try to fix the problem right off the bat. Instead, just empathize with them. Empathy is not scripted. It's not saying the same exact thing. Oh, that's so hard. Oh, that's so hard. Oh, that's so hard. You're a parrot saying the same exact thing over and over again. It's not scripted. Sometimes you don't know the words to say, right? Sometimes they come to you and open up. Have you ever had somebody come to you and open up about something that was like really deep and you didn't feel like you had that kind of a relationship, and all of a sudden they're saying, my wife's going to leave me, right? And you've been working with this person for a couple months and you had no idea that they were going to open up to you with something so huge and so deep. And you don't know what to say. You don't have a close relationship. You don't have an established communication pattern for serious conversations. You don't know what to say. In those cases, it's okay to say, I really don't know what to say, but that sounds like it's really hard, right? Something to that effect. I really don't know what to say, but I just want to thank you for trusting me enough to tell me, right? That's empathy. Empathy is not a scripted, canned response. Empathy is not enabling, right? Enabling is when we let the person do something that's damaging to themselves, okay? So they're having a bad time with their wife. They're having a bad time with a coworker. It's not enabling them saying, you should go back in there and really fight for your rights. If the other person, especially in this case, if the person themselves is kind of an a-hole and is pushing people around and finally gets pushed back in, it's not enabling their behavior. If they're doing behavior that's negative, it's not encouraging that behavior. And finally, empathy is not minimizing or trying to put a silver lining on something. Oh, your coworker comes in and says that they miscarried last night, right? You don't say, well, at least you can get pregnant. Right? That is not the way to empathize. So here's all the things that empathy isn't. So what is empathy? Empathy itself has 4 attributes, and this is really important. I want you to pay particular attention to these 4 attributes. First off, empathy is perspective taking. Empathy is sitting down and letting your mind go to where that person is. Now, what they're going through may be extremely foreign to you. Maybe you've never been a boss, and your boss comes to you and says they had a really hard time because they just had to fire somebody, and you've never fired somebody in your life. You have no idea what it's like to fire somebody and the pressure and the guilt that might put on you, right? But what you can do is imagine yourself in that situation. I'm in a situation where I just had to give somebody some really bad news. They probably blame me directly, even though it may or may not be directly my fault. I'm feeling very guilty. I'm hurting this person. And you can imagine what that's like, taking their perspective. Second, empathy is withholding judgment. It's not making any kind of a judgment of any way, shape, or form about what they're going through. So again, if your boss comes in and tells you he had to fire somebody and he had a hard time, it's not saying, oh, you were totally justified because that guy was a slacker. That's not empathy. Empathy is a lack of judgment about their actions. It's simply going to where they're at and understanding what they're going through. Third, it's identifying the underlying emotion. How are they feeling? Are they feeling guilty? Are they feeling pain? Are they feeling fear? And here's a tip. Underneath every negative emotion is one of 2 emotions, fear and pain. That's the emotions underneath every negative emotion. If you dig down deep enough, you'll find either fear or pain. Finally, communicate back an understanding. And this is the part where empathy really matters, because you can do all the other steps. You can take their perspective. You can withhold your judgment. You can identify that underlying emotion and realize, oh, they're feeling a lot of guilt, or they're feeling a lot of frustration. But until you communicate back your understanding, you have not empathized with the other person. Empathy is a 2-way communication, right? Once you finally communicate back with them, well, that sounds really hard. Are you feeling guilty that you had to let this guy go? That's empathy. So This is a really important part. Empathy requires vulnerability. This is true empathy, is the ability to be vulnerable. The ability to truly say, I've been in a situation like that. I understand what you might be feeling, right? That implies vulnerability. That implies that at some point you were in a down place. And you have to be able to honestly, vulnerably say that in order to empathize with somebody else. This whole, if you're a male, this whole bro, tough machismo that we try to put on, you have to let that go. If you're a female, this idea that you are trying to be perfect, right? The ideal perfect female, and you can't ever have an imperfect thought or emotion or day, we have to let those things go and simply say, that sucks. I understand how bad that might be hurting you. Okay? So it requires vulnerability, and this is one of the things that makes it very hard to empathize with other people. So let's talk about ways to use empathy. There are a lot of situations at work where you might need to use empathy. I've been talking about a lot of things, and you're probably thinking, I go to my day-to-day meetings, and we're just talking ideas, and there's no real empathy involved. But in reality, there are a lot of situations at work where we need empathy. Performance reviews, right? There's plenty of times when you are on one side of that chair or the other, and that's a stressful situation. Somebody is there finding out how happy the person who signs their paychecks is with them. A very stressful situation. Good time to use empathy. Sprint planning meetings. Right? We do a lot of back and forth deciding what's going to go on. There's a lot of people saying, I know that one of the things that really stressed my boss out was me saying, nope, I'm not committing to that. Didn't probably use a lot of empathy with them, but those could be stressful situations. Other kinds of planning meetings, like feature planning meetings, where you get down and, all right, how are we going to build this feature? You got 5 guys in a room, they're all trying to figure out, how are we going to build this feature? Those can be stressful situations, especially as people propose ideas. You know, somebody proposes an idea and you don't really like what she said. It's a time to use empathy. Retrospectives, or as I like to call them, witch hunts. Who's been through a retrospective? Oh, all right. Who thinks witch hunt is very apropos? I've had my fair share of difficult retrospectives. Whose fault is it that we didn't get everything done on time? Pair programming, right? It's another good time to be using empathy. Somebody else is trying, you two are in a very intimate situation trying to write some code. Both of you throwing out ideas about the right way to do it. Good time to be using empathy. Disciplinary meetings. Does that show up pretty well? I don't know how well this image shows up. It's a pretty low-res image. This is from the first episode of The Next Generation. They're on trial. What? It is frustrating only finding a low-res image. So disciplinary meetings, you may be on one side or the other. If you are the one that's getting in the disciplinary meeting and you're getting disciplined, you still have a place of empathy because you're getting attacked. You can feel for the person who's trying to tell you, hey, this is what's going on, what you're doing wrong. Vice versa, if you're the one that has to deliver the bad news and say, hey, you did this and we've got a problem, we've got to solve it, your behavior was not acceptable according to company standards, having empathy for that person and listening and hearing what they're really saying, very appropriate. We can have impromptu discussions in the hallways where we talk about features, about bugs, about frustrations. These are often one of the most common times when people are really frustrated and venting about something negative going on at work. App down comes some kind of a critical bug, right? 2 a.m., you get called. Got to rush into the office. There's 4 of you trying to figure out what in the heck went wrong and how are we going to fix it, right? Stressful situations. Who here has pulled an all-nighter for work? Everybody else just hoping that server comes up correctly, right? Coordinating implementations. Another time when you get 2 groups together and one group is really upset that the other group is stepping on its toes and they got to get their stuff intermingled and get their pieces to work together. Another good time to be using empathy. Finally, death march deadlines. Can you see that? This is another one I was really hoping you guys could see clearly. Riker with the very bushy, overgrown beard. For 6 weeks, he's been coding 16 hours a day and hasn't been able to shave, sleeping at the office, right? Who's been through a death march? Working a 68 plus 80-hour week, right? Those times suck. They get really stressful. Do people get on edge? Are they short-tempered? Yeah. Perfect time to be using empathy. So let's talk about how to communicate. This is the part where you want to communicate back to the other person. You've got something that you need to say. The other person has come in and said, listen, I've got a real problem with how you did this. And they lay it out. At that point, you go into empathy mode. You listen, you reflect back what they've said. You have put aside your defenses, and you said, okay, tell me. And maybe they didn't do a good job telling you, right? Maybe they used some words that you prefer they didn't use. When they're done and you've reflected back to the other person, this is what I understand you're saying, and they've acknowledged that. That is the time to communicate back, not in the middle. When somebody says, you did this, and that really sucked, and you want to say, hey, that's not an appropriate word to say in a conversation. That is the moment that they say it is not. You got to wait for them to finish, okay? You got to wait until that other person has acknowledged that they've been heard. That's the time to communicate back. Do not try to communicate before that time. There are a lot of challenges that come with expressing empathy, and a lot of that really just has to do with us. It's our own personality. Most of it has to do with the fact that we will feel attacked, and that makes it very difficult to empathize with somebody else. You come in, you tell me you got a problem with my code, and I'm not happy about it because you're attacking my work, which means you're attacking me, which is not the truth. They're attacking your work, and they're actually not attacking your work. They're criticizing it and saying it could be better. Right? Maybe you disagree with them, maybe you don't. It's hard for us to listen and empathize. The other reason it's really hard for us to empathize is simply because we are uncomfortable with other people's pain. That is a nearly universal thing. We are uncomfortable when other people are in pain. That's why we do all those. This is what empathy isn't, this distracting and silver lining. We're hoping we're going to quickly shove them out of the pain. Here, get out of the pain so that I'm not uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable being with somebody who's in pain, right? Who here has ever gone to the hospital to visit somebody and they were in pain in that moment? How hard was it to sit there? How much did you want to get up and leave, right? We do not like other people's pain because we are primates. We are inherently wired to connect, and inherently underlying, we are empathetic. We care about other people. And that pain makes us uncomfortable, and so it becomes this selfish thing. I can't handle that person's pain. It makes me feel pain. So those are huge challenges in having empathy. Now, there are times not to use empathy, and this is very important. We do not always have to use a crass term, bend over and take it, right? If you're in a meeting, somebody starts yelling at you, depending on the situation, your reliance on your job, whether or not you may get fired, it may be time for you to leave the situation. It may be time for you to leave the environment. You don't have to sit there and, all right, tell me what you're saying, and they're screaming in your face. Okay? If they're truly, truly attacking you verbally, that is not a time to empathize. Right? You may either have to just bear it, weather the storm, and then later on find a time to say that's not an appropriate way to communicate. Or you may need to remove yourself from the situation, but there are times not to. It's when you're being essentially abused, right? And abuse can be verbal, it can be emotional. If you are being abused, that is not the time to try to have empathy. That is the time to back yourself away from the situation because you are not going to be able to empathize, and it's just going to devolve into something very negative. Either you're going to shut down or you're going to react. And you don't want those two things. So those are not the times to use empathy. So that's very important to know when to use empathy. But in your work relationships, these are the types of things that we go through our work relationships. We spend so much time at work with other people. We'll spend years working alongside the same people. And I formed a lot of good friendships over the relationships that I've had, the work relationships that I've had with other people that have lasted long beyond those jobs. I've had some great friendships that didn't last very long, and I've had some bad relationships that I tried my best to make work, and sometimes I didn't try my best to make work. But we will spend a lot of time with these people. If we can improve our relationship with those people and can improve our communication by using empathy, our life will be a lot better, and we will also improve the lives of our coworkers and improve the efficacy of our companies. So, if this is a topic that you wish to find more about, there's two references I want to list here. Brené Brown, she's got a lot of great TED Talks and written a lot of great books. And lastly, the book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk. It sounds like it's just a parenting guide, and there's a lot of it that's about parenting, but really it's a guide to empathy. And so these are both great resources for you to check out. So I just want to close up with saying thank you for listening to me, and empathy is a very important subject and something that I hope that you guys will take back with you and remember the next time you're in a difficult situation at work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks. Thanks.
VGA. Oopsie. Okay. Cool. Hello. My name's Jordan Last. Real quick, to kind of figure out everybody's kind of skill level here so I can maybe tailor it. Who's super competent in AngularJS? Or feels there? Good. Not too many. Who's kind of like mid-level, you know, you're making apps and stuff? Okay. And then super new people? Yes. Awesome. Okay. So today we're going to talk about client-side storage. Pretty much we're going to discuss how you can have a full-blown kind of database in the browser. So yeah, the talk's entitled A Simple Pattern for Client-Side Storage in AngularJS. A little bit about me. I'm Jordan Last. I study computer science at BYU, and I really like JavaScript. In fact, I converted my friend to JavaScript a few months ago, maybe. I don't know. So I work for BYU Archaeology. These are archaeologists doing their thing. It turns out in archaeology there is a ton of note-taking that goes on. So they're meticulous note-takers. All their notes have relationships within each other. They have projects. They have sites within projects. There's excavation areas within all those. There are crews. You have artifacts that you're finding that you need to take notes on. You have a whole grid across your excavation site. So there's just tons of kind of interrelated data. And traditionally, more notes, yeah, they just write them down in these notebooks. And I've seen them. They're pretty thick sometimes. And when all that data is handwritten, it just becomes really hard to do analysis on the data. It's relational for a reason, because you want to be able to see the relationships between things. So let's say you had like an artifact, and you want to know, okay, I have this artifact here. I'd love to know about all the artifacts around this artifact, so, you know, within the same kind of grid area. Right now, by hand, you'd have to go through the binders and look up every single artifact by hand. Finally, you have a stack. Oh, okay, these are the ones that are near to this artifact. And it's just a lot of complicated work. So what BYU Archaeology decided to do, hold on. Here's the solution to this problem. It's called Excavator 1.0 trademark. Pretty much this is a tablet application for the archaeologists to just write all their notes on tablets. And on site we have these wireless nodes set up. We have about 4 of them, so we have our own little wireless network. And crews with tablets put all their stuff in there, and across the wireless network everything synchronizes, and it works nicely. So yeah, I spent
with the other developer I was working with about a year working on Excavator 1.0, and it was a full native Android application. So Java and everything. And the whole time I was just kind of thinking, I would love to do this thing in JavaScript if it were possible, and HTML and CSS, because for me, just the way that Android works with the XML and everything, it just seems, it's all bulky, and I don't know, I never got used to it really. But HTML and CSS, even though it's kind of weird, I just, you can customize things. JavaScript's super awesome. You can reference functions by string name. If you try to do that in Java, you may not survive. So yeah, that worked out. Then we wanted to make another app called Surveyor. Surveyors for pre-excavation. So archaeologists are out kind of scouring the land for artifacts. And I had been looking into ways of writing an app in JavaScript that could run on Android, that could run on iOS, and it just never seemed, the reason we didn't do it with Excavator is just it never seemed mature enough. And yeah, and we were pretty deep into the code base anyways. But this new app, Surveyor, it offered a brand new opportunity to try some new stuff. And eventually in February or March, I was looking into it again, and I found the Ionic framework. Has anyone heard of it? Yes. I found the Ionic framework, read some blog posts, other people's experiences, and it seemed like this could work. So I got the go-ahead, and for the last 4 months, I've been developing Surveyor in the web platform completely, just JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And it's been working out pretty well. Okay, persistent storage in the browser. So the first thing that came up when we were starting to do Surveyor was, how are we going to persist our data? Because in Android, you have SQLite. In iOS, I think they also use SQLite. And the question was, okay, how can I do that with JavaScript? Cordova, they have a SQLite plugin. So you could run so Cordova, if people haven't heard of Cordova, that's kind of the open source library that lets you run JavaScript code on iOS and Android devices. So you can use the same code base, and it'll work on both devices. So yeah, Cordova has a SQLite plugin, but I wanted a storage option that was even more cross-platform than that. If possible, I want it to be completely browser-based. So it'd be cool if they had SQLite in the browser, because I just feel like the browser's kind of as cross-platform as you can get, and I was going to be debugging in the browser. So there are 3 main options at the time, at least, for persistent storage in the browser. Local storage is a simple kind of key-value pair. You give it a name, you give it a value. The value can be a primitive type, or it can be a JavaScript object, or a JSON object, whatever. That's cool. It works for simple things. We're definitely using local storage for a couple things in the app. But if you want your persistent storage to scale at all, if you want to use queries or have indexes and have that nice performance gain, local storage is just not going to cut it. So cross that one out. IndexedDB is an up-and-coming browser-based database. That kind of had to get cut out immediately because it doesn't actually work in iOS and Safari, for right now at least, or last time I checked, which was yesterday, or 2 days ago. IndexedDB is kind of like MongoDB or Cassandra or I think RethinkDB. It's a NoSQL database. It's an object store. It's cool if you like that kind of thing. WebSQL is what it came down to, and here's why. WebSQL is pretty much SQLite in the browser. SQLite, it's been tried and proven. It worked great in our Android app. Just kind of a NoSQL versus relational database thing. In our app, we had a backend. We had all our models, I don't know, like 20 to 30 models. Everything was pretty relational. There were foreign keys kind of going, not all over the place, but they were in there. And we tried to switch everything to MongoDB on the backend because MongoDB is really cool. It was a cool thing to do. We tried it out. For us, it just seemed like too much of a paradigm shift. We already had something that was working for us. We kind of had to rethink everything. We weren't experts in MongoDB or NoSQL databases, so it just kind of didn't seem like it was going to be worth the effort to us. And we didn't have to scale horizontally across anything. We just had one server. So that's why in Excavator we chose, let's just keep with a relational database. We use Postgres now. So I thought, okay, for this new app surveyor, let me just go with what I know. It's a relational database. It will work well. It will scale. So that's what I did. One interesting thing about WebSQL is that it's officially deprecated. That means the W3C is not going to implement it as a standard. There are arguments for and against it that you could read on the internet. The reason I feel comfortable still using WebSQL, though it's deprecated, is Chrome and Safari both still support it. I don't see any signs of them not supporting it. That means WebSQL is going to work in Android, it's going to work in iOS, and the only reason that I could find for why the W3C decided not to implement WebSQL as a standard is because they want multiple implementations to base the implementation of WebSQL off of, and they only had SQLite. So, but one perfect implementation is enough for me. Just kidding. Okay. So let's get into a sample application. This is the Base Jumpers Anonymous official website. It's really simple. Oh, so overview. We're going to just implement persistent storage in this app. So that's what we're about to do. So there are three main sections to this app. Creating a user, so signing up. Creating a jump. It has a title, it has a description, and it's associated with a user. Can you yeah, you guys can see. And then you can view your jumps. Right now, you sign up, user saved. It's actually not doing anything. It's just throwing up an alert. I'll show you the code in a second. Viewing jumps, I just hard-coded an array in there. Okay. Here is the application code. We have 3 controllers. Each controller controls one part of that application. So we have a sign-up controller, a view jumps controller, and a create jump controller. This is not necessarily how you should structure an application, but for our purposes. Yeah, sure. Good? More? Good. You can see? Okay, so signing up. You guys can see the mouse, right? Okay. Signing up is just hooked up to this function, scope.signup. We'll just pass in the parameters that they type into the input. Right now, it just alerts that the user is saved. So we want to put this thing in a database. If you look at the application structure on the left over here, this is kind of, I feel like this is typical of a hybrid application. You kind of have your outside code with your package.json, your bower.json, any node stuff that you might need, and then there's a www folder where you shove the actual front-end application code. All we have is an index.html file and an app.js file, and then our lib distribution is just concatenating all the files into one. So it's just one request. You don't have to worry about that. Okay, first thing we're going to do is add a models folder. So if you're familiar with models on the back end, it's kind of the same thing. We're just going to keep all our models in one place. Who here is familiar with I don't know, object relational mapping? Do people know what I mean when I say model? I guess I could explain it as well. So when you, in a relational database or a NoSQL database, it's handy to represent in your code tables as objects. So we're going to make a user table in our database. So we're going to have a user model in our code. The user table is going to have some columns: first name, last name, email, username. The user model is going to have some properties, which are the same as the columns. And because we're using AngularJS, we're going to make these models services. So then we can inject these models into any kind of controller code or any other service where we actually need to access the database. We'll just inject the user service, and we'll be good to go. So let's make a service. The application is called BGA. I'm going to call this service user. Okay. That's just boilerplate code for a service. Here's what we're going to do. Let me write it first. Okay. So we've defined a user variable, and this probably looks new to you right here, persistence. We are going to use an ORM called persistence.js. So ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. Pretty much, persistence is a library that kind of abstracts away all of the raw SQL code. It gives you really nice methods for saving things, for querying the database. One of the things I want to kind of get across is try to avoid raw queries as much as possible. In my experience, ORMs can usually take care of most of the basic create, read, update, delete stuff. If you need to use raw queries, go ahead, but ORMs seem to add just really nice encapsulations for you. So persistence.define is going to define our user schema for us. All we do in here is we add the properties that we want. So first name is the first property. So imagine our table in the database, the user table. We now have a column called first name, and its type is text. Last name, type text. No, yes. Okay, we have defined our user schema. So this is our model object. We're going to be able to create instances of this user, pass them around, add properties to them, and then we're going to be able to persist them back to the database. And if you notice down here, I return that user object. That user object is pretty much acting kind of like a constructor function. So you'll be able to create new instances of it after you inject the service. So the first thing we want to do once we've created a user object is save it. So what we're going to do is attach a save method to the user's prototype. This is going to allow us to call save on any instance of a user object that we have. And this is persistence specific code now. In persistence, if you want to save something to the database, you add the object, and then you flush the object. And so I'm just kind of encapsulating all that code into the save method so that we don't have to add things anywhere manually and flush manually. We just put it in there, add it, flush it, and then it will be persisted to the database. Also, it would probably be nice to know for sure when it's been written to the database. So persistence is asynchronous, so we're not going to know just because you ran, or just because you invoked the method, you're not going to know that it's been persisted. So let's add the ability to call back, function or flush takes a callback as well. So if your callback exists, then we'll run the callback. Okay. This is our save method, and it should work. So let's go to our controller, sign up controller. Let's inject user. Okay, now we have full access to our user model. Let's make a new user. Okay, and attach the properties. This might not be the best way to do it, but it will work. Just name. Okay, so we created a new user, attached the properties that we need, and now we can write it to the database. Remember, we have this save method on the prototype. So just call save, pass in the callback that you want. Let's just alert user saved. Cool. All right, let's see if it worked. Just put myself in. That's not my real email. Here we go. Joe. I was afraid that would... Oh, okay. One piece of boilerplate code that I forgot to add. Okay, so persistence has some configuration code. I just put it in the run function, so whenever the application starts up, it's going to run persistence config. You just give it a database name, you can give it a description, and then the maximum size of the database. And here's the important thing, well, they're both important. Schema sync. Any model that we've registered with persistence is going to be synchronized, and the tables are going to be created in the database when we run schema sync. Okay. Cool. This should work now. Last. User saved. Okay, this is one of the coolest things about Web SQL. Open up Chrome DevTools or Safari DevTools. Here's our database right here. BGA, user table. And there's our row. Another good thing about using an ORM is it will add things like UUIDs automatically for you. So I didn't have to generate that. It just automatically got put in there, which is nice. Okay. User model, done. Let's make a jump model. Just add jump, add a service. We'll just copy our code. Anywhere that it says user, make it say jump. And let's change these properties to be title and description. So a jump has a title, has a description, and it has a username so that we can associate it with a user. In real life, this would be a foreign key, but it's just going to be a column for now. And the save method is exactly the same, jump.prototype.save. Okay, inject jump. Okay, create a jump. Attach the properties that we need. And it should be exactly the same. Jump.save function. Throw in our callback so that we know that the jump has been saved. Okay, that looks good. Let's go see if it works. Where do you guys want to jump? Budapest. Awesome jump. I'll associate it with myself. Jump saved. Let's go check. Resources. There it is. Budapest, awesome jump. Username. Awesome. Okay. So that's simple saving to the database. Let's now implement the view jumps portion. So this is going to be querying the database. So we're going to make a method. Let's call it getAll by username. It will return all jumps associated with a username. We're not going to attach this to the prototype because we don't need an instance of a jump to get all the jumps associated with a username. Doesn't matter. It's kind of like a static method, or a static. It's static, kind of like in Java. So getAll by username. To do this one, we're going to pass in the username and pass in a callback. Okay, here's where we use persistence specific methods. Close your eyes, don't look at this. Okay. So normally we'd have to write a SQL query, select all by whatever, put the string in there, and then return our stuff. With persistence, it's just jump.all. So we're querying the database, set a filter on it. We want the username column to equal this username that we pass in. And then .list will actually run the query. And we pass in a callback for persistence to call for us. And it will return the jumps that we need. The callback that we pass in from our app code is going to call back, or is going to receive jumps as a parameter. And that should be all we need. So get rid of this. Let's inject jump again. Okay. So like I said, we don't need an instance of a jump because we didn't attach it to the prototype. Jump.getAll by username. Pass in the username. Pass in a callback. The callback has a parameter called jumps. Okay, this is something you just need to do to get the list to update. If you guys know a better way, tell me after. We're going to set scope.jumps equal to jumps. So if we look at the HTML, it's just a simple ng repeat for jump and jumps. Okay, so yes, that should work. Let's try to view our jumps. We made a jump in Budapest. Pass in my username and Budapest, awesome jump. Worked. Okay. So we've created and saved to the database. We've been able to read with a query. Updating is the same as saving. In persistence, it's just a create or update. The only thing we haven't done is deleting. Okay, wrap it up. And deleting would be simple to implement using similar methods. Okay, I want to finish with a few key points. Hopefully, this pattern kind of embodies these things. Never access the database directly. Try to encapsulate everything as much as you can. A really good way to do it, make some kind of class for your model, and any model-specific database access, keep it with your model. Use an ORM if you can. That really helps you to avoid doing the raw queries. And I mean, the reason I'm just kind of against raw queries is that it's just harder for me to do. But yeah, using an ORM can kind of save time there. And just doing all these things really helps your code to be maintainable. I feel like it scales well. It stops just spaghetti code, just having SQL statements or whatever just spread throughout everything. And one key thing, if persistence was kind of confusing or anything, you don't have to use persistence and you don't have to use web SQL to use a pattern like this. You can use any database you want. In your save method and your query methods, the only thing that you need to do is swap out your database access inside those methods, and then anywhere that you've injected the service, just keep that the same. It doesn't actually matter. And that's all.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. Okay, so quick start networking. All right, make this very painless. Got a couple of questions, just want you to answer. Raise your hand or shout, whatever you want to do. And then you're going to ask questions too. So first off, who out here is a recruiter or someone hiring, looking to hire a developer? All right, so we got 3 or 4 people here. I'll put my hand up. I know there's a couple over here. Who out here is looking for a job? All right, so meet up. Maybe we can start that over in this area. If you're looking for a job or looking to hire someone, let's meet up over here. All right, next question. Who's looking for a mentor? Someone trying to, someone to help them figure out the ropes? Got 1, 2, 3, 4. Always, yeah. Who out here would be willing to help these folks? Help them get the ropes, help them understand the dev? Also, a couple here. Shaky hand. Awesome. If we can meet over here in this red area, just back in that corner over there. That'd be awesome. Okay, now here's time for you guys to get your own, get your help. So this is how it works. I'm going to hand you the microphone. You state your problem, and then someone else is going to say, I can help with that problem. We'll figure it out like that. I'm going to start. So I have a problem. I'm looking, I really want to do, we want to do a functional meetup in one of the next couple of meetups, functional JavaScript, functional Angular, if it can be done. And who can help me with that? Anyone out here who could either speak or point me to a speaker, someone who would be awesome with it? Oh, we're all shy. Oh, come on, I know someone's got to know someone at least, right? Oh, well, that doesn't start out so great. 1. Awesome. Okay, talk with me afterwards. That would be awesome. That'll point me in a direction. And then, all right. So who has a question or a problem? It could be something like, oh, got them already. Perfect.
Hopefully this is distilled enough. Many of us want to have our life have an impact on the world. And as I look at what potentially are some trends that are occurring in our world, it looks like technology, as fascinating and as amazing as it is, may be so disruptive that 40 to 50%, so half our workforce in the near future is going to be displaced. So part of the things that I'm working on, in addition to helping coders get awesome jobs, is wanting to collaborate in very meaningful ways on developing a framework, and I won't give it all away, but developing a framework that would allow our society to, 1, help mentor individuals starting, down in junior high, high school, going through college, into learning how to code. Another thing that I want to do within this program, within this framework, within this responsive OS type of organization that would ideally be an API first type entity, is to be able to also provide a social net, a way for individuals to be able to learn, to retool so they can find a job, but also be able to have things like food provided for them. So a lot of this has been flushed out. It's worked at very high levels. But what I'm looking for is individuals that understand technology, that would be willing to collaborate and help design a framework of a responsive OS type organization that is capable of being open sourced over a period of time. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for, is individuals that understand how to design frameworks to pretty much change the world. Jordan Basiso.
Who can help Jordan? Or knows anyone that designs frameworks? Can help Jordan. I'd love to chat with you after.
Okay.
So, okay. There was another hand over here. Who has a problem? Come on. Two more. At least two more, and then we can stop. Is it that painful? Wow. Someone got a text. You could read your text on the microphone if you want. I heard a beep. All right, we'll call that good for tonight then. All right, so let's do the raffle. So next month, bring a problem. If you want to help learning Node.js, just struggling with understanding what libraries there are, that's something you can ask. If you need help with the latest and greatest CSS framework, I'm sure there's someone here who can help. So we're going to try and make this more collaborative and a great place to meet people. All right, the raffle. We get two people real quick here. The winners are, I've got